Do you have loads of ideas that you want to execute, whether it's that book that you always wanted to write, or that song that you never finished, or those lists of startup ideas that you have? Do these ideas live and die on your laptop or in your notebook? Well, if that's the case, then you're probably suffering from perfectionism. In this video, I'm going to talk about what that is and 5 tips that you can use to tackle it. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ahmed and I'm an AI researcher at Cambridge University, and this is another episode of Memories and Lessons with Jai. If you're new to my channel, please click the subscribe button below so you can stay updated on when I upload a new video. For today's episode, I brewed something I picked up a few weeks back at Sainsbury's, and it's made by Sainsbury's as well. Surprisingly, it's pretty good. It's the Sencha rose green tea mixed with apple, rosehip, blue corn flowers, and pink rose petals. It's got just the right kick of caffeine for an early evening dose before you start watching Love is Blind. Perfectionism's actually a lot more common than you think, and it hinders a lot of us from achieving the things that we want to achieve. The idea of perfection, or the state of being perfect, is actually completely unattainable, and it's an imaginative state that we've made up in our minds. We're trying to chase something that doesn't even exist. I would even go as far as saying that perfectionism is a type of disease that has various symptoms, including procrastination and depression. A few months ago, I was writing a paper, and before I even wrote a single word down, I started imagining how I wanted people to react. I started thinking, oh, I want people to laugh and cry. I wanted people to start a revolution after they read this paper. But then my inner voice kicked in, and I was like, bro, you're writing a paper on adaptive spaced repetition learning curves. Nobody's going to be crying, or at least not for the reasons that you think. I think one of the challenges of perfectionism is that when you have this representation in your head of what you want the outcome to be, and you compare it with what you have in front of you, which is like a half completed, or not even a half complete, just a barely started task, you start to feel anxious. You start to feel like, wow, I'm so far away from this unattainable goal that I have that I don't know if I'm ever going to get there. So how can we deal with this? So one of the biggest challenges for perfectionists is that they often get bogged down in the final result. They're so obsessed with the outcome of the task that they forget about the process itself. So they're focused on perfect, not better. What that means in reality is that when you actually start writing an essay, you have this image in your head about what the essay should be like. And then when you write 3 sentences, you look down and you're like, yeah, I'm so far away from my end result, and you punish yourself. And what that means is that ultimately you're reducing your motivation and either painfully drag yourself through the process in the case where it's due and their deadlines are out of your hands, or you just give up on the task altogether and you abandon it. If we flip it on its head and in fact stop focusing on how far are we from perfection and rather focus on, are we better than we were before? So if I write 1 sentence and then I write 5 sentences, am I better than the 1 sentence that I wrote in the past? So you've changed your reward function. You've changed your measurement of success. And that's incredibly important the bigger that your projects are. So if you're starting a company or if you're writing a book, there's going to be a lot of material in there and there's going to be a lot of tasks that you have to do. So if you're constantly measuring yourself by this end state of being this incredibly large organization or writing this masterpiece novel, you're always going to suffer and you're never going to really get through the task with the motivation that you need. As perfectionists, because we always want to make the perfect decisions, it's sometimes easier to not take responsibility for the decisions that you make. So if I'm a CEO and I'm a perfectionist, which is a dangerous combination, then you might stress out a lot on making decisions where there is a difference of opinion in different people. The world that we're living in now, this data-rich, information-abundant space, is incredibly dangerous for perfectionists who are decision makers. Primarily because there's a lot more feedback and advice to consider, right? Now, don't get me wrong, there are certain things that you should do your research on. You know, like if you're applying for a university or you're applying for a particular course, you want to know if that's a good fit for you and whether the career prospects are good. But then there are the other things. So when I moved into my new place, I decided I wanted to be healthy, so I was going to cook more. And as a result, I was like, you know what? I need a good chopping board. Normal people will go to Sainsbury's or, TK Maxx or something like that and pick up a chopping board. I didn't do that. Instead, I decided to Google top chopping boards and went through the list. And the first link that I clicked on turns out was from 2019. And God forbid I would look at a top chopping board list from 2019. Guys, we're almost in 2021. Chopping board technology changes over those years. not gonna do that. So eventually I found a 2020 chopping board top list and decided on 2 options. So either the Joseph multi-set, which has like, different colors for different types of foods, vegetables, fish, meat, etc. And this like bamboo wood one. And I started obsessing over it. And I couldn't decide between the 2 because, they were both 4.5, and there was like these reviews. One said, this wood one is hard to maintain, the flimsiness of the rubber one, whatever. I got obsessed with it. I even started having dreams about chopping boards. I was hoping for like a divine intervention in my dream that says Joseph and Joseph is the one. Do you know how f***ed up you have to be to do research on your chopping boards with the same depth and intellectual rigor that you study the coronavirus? The lesson here is you gotta trust yourself. You gotta trust yourself and stop chasing this perfect decision. I mean, I think in some sense, I was hoping somewhere in the comments of the Joseph and Joseph set one, I would find like a comment that says, hey man, don't go for the bamboo wood one. So the lesson is trust yourself and stop chasing the perfect decision. One of the things that perfectionists struggle with is to do multiple things at the same time. You'll often hear them say things like, right, once I finish X, then I'll do Y. Once I reach a certain stage in my company, then I'll start a side hustle. I did that a lot with these videos on YouTube. I always thought I'd gained a few pounds during my last few years of the PhD, and I thought, right, once I lose this weight, then I'll make these videos. And I think the reason that this happens for perfectionists is because we want to do everything at 110%. And the challenge is that the last 10% is artificial. It's something that we've conjured up in our heads. It doesn't exist, it's unattainable. And out of the 100%, 20% of the effort will get you 80% of the results. So what we really need to be aiming for is to get 80% of the results. We don't need to get 100% of the results, because that remaining time that we save from not having to try to get the last 20% is what we can use to dedicate to all the other things that we want to do in our life. And that's how you ultimately become a better multitasker. That's how you can get involved in more projects. And I think arguably that's how you become more well-rounded and more fulfilled as an individual. You've probably heard of this thing called the 10,000 hour rule. I think Malcolm Gladwell was one of the people who popularized this idea. Largely, I agree with that. But the issue with the 10,000 hour rule is the subtlety that you actually have to use that time wisely. So if you're doing something wrong for 10,000 hours, I think you just become really good at doing it wrong. So the reason why I say 10,000 iterations is because in some way I feel iterations covers the process. And it means that you're actually improving, you're iteratively improving over 10,000 steps. The reason why I think the 10,000 iteration rule is so important for perfectionists is because it allows them to focus on process. If they're focused on the end result, it's often hard to really understand and appreciate the process. And constantly you're doing this gap analysis where you're like, oh, how far am I from my end result? So instead, if you're doing 10,000 iterations, at each iteration, what you're doing is that you're evaluating yourself versus the previous iteration. So you're saying, right, I've done better than my previous iteration. I've written 3 more sentences, I've written a paragraph, I've written a chapter, and you're constantly improving on it. And therefore, unlike when you're doing a gap analysis where you're saying, oh, I'm so far away from my end result, here you're actually saying, oh, wow, I've improved. I've done well. I should reward myself. I can tell you that that definitely helps you get the motivation to get through the task. Humans can be so complex sometimes, but sometimes it can be so simple. If you want to see how simple humans can be, then spend like a sweaty weekend with me and my friends playing Halo 3 on Xbox. I think the gaming industry have really nailed it when it comes to exploiting the human need for instant gratification. As a result, a lot of people have been really inspired by the gaming industry to gamify a lot of things, whether it's education, training. It really helps people attain that instant gratification that they seek. In fact, Jerry Seinfeld uses this tactic to help him write comedy. And he talks about in one of his interviews that he has this massive calendar on his wall, and he uses like a red marker where every day that he sits down to write, he makes a big X, because he believes that the way that he improves his writing is by writing more and writing consistently. And in order to ensure that he does that, he writes a big X on every day that he writes. And the game is he's got to make sure that he doesn't break that chain. So every day he's got X's. It's kind of like the longer the chain becomes, the more motivated you are to continue that chain because you don't want to restart. It completely makes sense and is incredibly effective, according to him and other people who have followed his methodology. And I think it's incredibly important because as perfectionists, we get intimidated by big tasks. like writing a book or starting a company or completing an album. And we stop before we even start because we have this unattainable goal in our heads that we can't really reach. Every day we measure ourselves against that goal, and as a result, we don't really get the instant gratification that we're looking for and ultimately abandon the task altogether. When I was writing my thesis, I had this idea of a masterpiece in my head. Of course, it was an unrealistic goal, but even a more attainable goal would have been difficult for me because I would be constantly punishing myself for not being close to the end result. So as a result, what I did is that I did what Jerry Seinfeld would say, and I tried to not break the chain. Every morning, I would write for starting with like an hour, and then I pushed it up to like 3-4 hours every day, and I'd make an X every time I did it, so then I wouldn't want to break that chain. And it kind of felt like playing Snake. You know when you're playing Snake on those old Nokia phones and you're like, Snake's getting longer and longer, and you get a little bit nervous. You're like, oh, I want to make sure that I don't mess this up. That's kind of how I felt about writing my thesis, because I was like, oh right, I got to make sure I do this every day. I don't want to like not do it, because otherwise I'll have to restart. So I think if you can find a way to gamify whatever you're doing, then you don't have to wait for this arbitrary notion of success to give you the instant gratification reward that you're looking for. So, you know, whether you're starting a company or you're writing something, find a way to gamify it. Find a way to get something out of it, some reward. Even if it's an artificial reward like an X on a calendar. It really helps, and it keeps you going, and it lets you focus on the process instead of the end result. I think that's one reason why progress pics really work for people who go to the gym. That's not a personal anecdote, by the way. That's literally, like, I literally just devoured 4 big ass cookies before filming this. I'm actually slowly becoming a Pakistani uncle. You know, having chai, eating biscuits. Next video, you see me wearing shalwar kameez with like salan stains, slowly cursing people under my breath. Burn it. Perfectionism is one of the biggest hindrances for people who are trying to achieve their goals. And I hope that you find these 5 tips as helpful as I did. And if you found this video helpful, please subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up, or leave me a comment down below. I'm gonna finish the rest of this chai. Till next time.